Mike Bickle is probably my best friend in this world.
Glory to the righteous one.
More.
I was in a small group with him and his wife for 7 years, on his staff as his senior associate, involved at IHOP for an additional 4 years, 11 years. I know this man to the depths of his soul.
I'm going to ask for more.
You know, Mike Bickle has a profound talk, and if you want to look up a profound talk on worship, I don't have time to go into it. He does a much better job than I will.
And the Father knew what he was doing, because I wound up here.
Just say, Lord, more.
Say it again. Say it again.
The devil is a liar!
But it's Mike Bickle, and that's the title of his talk is Our Gift of Love to Jesus, the Refusal of Spiritual Showmanship.
And Jeremy, I was with you. I was at Bethel with Bill Johnson. You've been there for years. You know, Bill Johnson's one of my dear friends. And at the Bethel teams that come and go through here, we love Bethel. And I really love Bill Johnson. And even Chris Valentin. I really like him too.
That's what Mike Bickle says.
My greatest hero of faith on the earth right now, Mike Bickle.
He is a dark deceiver, but it's masked behind my spiritual hero and my dad's friend, you know.
I can count on one hand the amount of people I respect on the earth as much as Mike Bickle.
And the Lord just broke in. Oh, sure.
And then something went on with the youth group as well, right?
Yes. And after I left last weekend, they had a retreat, and some of those girls that night got drunk in the spirit.
But I told this heresy hunter, I said, tell you what, there are two boats, and I got to trust my life to one boat or the other. One is your boat, the other is Mike Bickle's boat. I'm getting in Mike's boat.
I love Mike Bickle. I love KC's house. I was born for it.
And then this weekend, the Lord touched a retreat that they were at and just set it ablaze, and people were rolling and drunk.
I want Francis. I want you to come. Francis is, he wouldn't say this and won't even appreciate this. He's one of the most connected leaders to the body of Christ with leaders. And so you're probably more connected than anybody I know.
Mike Bickle's a dear friend. Mike Bickle, the leader of IHOP, is a dear friend. All of my colleagues that have worked at IHOP, served at IHOP over the years are the highest caliber, thoroughly grounded in the Word, in love with Jesus, great heart for the Lord.
You know, Mike Bickle's my friend.
Every penny of his honoraria and of his royalties goes to missions.
And he tells us that he's used his honorarium money to buy us each a hotel room.
Every penny of his honoraria and of his royalties goes to missions.
That he's used his honorarium money to buy us each a hotel room.
So the truth has come out about the double life of Mike Bickle, and it seems to be unrelated to the Shawn Bolz incident. In fact, it's not. They actually share a great deal in common. They share a great deal in common with this man too, Bill Johnson. So the purpose of this video is to show that all of these people are connected and they all should be marked and avoided. All of these men and their associated ministries are related to each other in what is known as the New Apostolic Reformation, whether you like that term or not. In the upper left, you see the prophet Bob Jones, and in the upper right, you see the prophet Paul Cain. These two men are really at the foundation of all of these ministries, as well as a number of others. First, let's listen to these leaders talk about their beloved prophet, Paul Cain, who died in 2019.
I believe it's Paul Cain that said, God will offend your mind to reveal your heart.
As Paul Cain told us back in the 80s, that Lou mentioned this morning, even the stadiums would be filled.
Paul Cain's a real uniquely gifted prophet.
Bob Jones prophesied on, let's say it, this side of the river. There'll be a 1 billion soul harvest, especially of youth. We are now in the crossover because this is not just a new year. This isn't just a new decade. This is an entire new era in Christendom. Paul Cain was the one who gave the word constantly. I see the stadiums will be filled. The stadiums will be filled. The stadiums will be filled. It'll be called the greatest show on earth.
Wow. Paul Cain, who stepped into the healing revivals that we haven't seen anything like.
I will never forget when Paul Cain
came to our church. Paul Cain was great prophet. He was so detailed, way more detailed than I can ever talk about. Like specific with specifics to scare people. Every time he would come to our church, the air conditioning would blow up.
I just want to send my condolences, my blessings to the family of believers in Santa Maria and those who have gathered from all over the world, really, to honor this unique and powerful man, Paul Cain. He was such an unusual gift. The grace on his life was the most unusual. In spite of shortcomings and failures, God put himself on this man to display his wonders in such a unique way. So I celebrate the life of Paul Cain.
I thank you, Paul Cain, for the great vision that you gave to us. I thank you, Paul Cain, for the extraordinary moment of my life that gave me my life calling.
The 5 most powerful meetings I've ever been in my life were Paul Cain.
Now, Paul Cain has largely been discredited, and amazingly, it's from Jack Deere, who was one of his biggest promoters. Jack Deere admits, my desire for power enabled Paul Cain's manipulation, secret recordings, attempted extortion, and fabricated prophecies, the true legacy of IHOPKC's most influential prophet. So out of the 2 prophets, for the purpose of this video, I will be talking mostly about Bob Jones.
You could talk to Mike Bickle and find out that Bob Jones was his go-to prophet.
I love Bob Jones with all my heart. He's like my grandpa.
Bob Jones, what a wonderful man and a dear friend of this house.
Bob Jones became a spiritual father to me. He was crazy.
Bob Jones told Mike that he could do anything he wanted with a woman except intercourse and keep his mantle.
Wow.
Kansas City, Paul Cain, back in the day, there was the Kansas City prophets, that Bob Jones.
And as Bob Jones prophesied that this next season we're transitioning in is into the billion soul harvest.
And so Morning Star, was founded, of course, by Rick and Julie Joyner. And over the years, Bob Jones, the great prophet Bob Jones.
And there was Bob Jones and there was Paul Cain and seer prophet Bob Jones. The thousands of hours I could talk to you about him. He was like Santa Claus.
A prophet, Bob Jones, had said you have a teaching gift.
I got invited to go and hang out with Prophet Bob Jones, and if you don't know who that is, he was one of the Papa prophets that really raised up so many ministries. I mean, he prophesied a lot of what Bethel Church is doing in Redding, with Bill Johnson, what Mike Bickle's doing with the IHOP movement, what Morning Star's doing with Rick Joyner.
Bob Jones told Mike that he could do anything he wanted with a woman except intercourse and keep his mantle.
Wow.
So on February 3rd, an extensive report was finally published after months of investigation. Here's how reporter Rebecca Hopkins puts it in the first sentence from this article in the Roy's Report. Mike Bickle, founder of the International House of Prayer, Kansas City, groomed and sexually abused 17 women, some of whom were minors, according to an independent investigation released tonight. In some cases, the abuse constituted rape, the investigation found. That same investigative report said that the other leaders at IHOP shielded perpetrators and minimized victims' experiences in a systematic failure. Not only did this investigation find out and confirm that Mike Bickle was indeed a monster, a manipulative and deceitful pervert, there was a bunch of other bad stuff going on at IHOP. Throughout the investigation, we identified 16 accused staff members implicated in sexual misconduct claims. Up until just a year and a half ago, Mike Bickle was one of the most trusted charismatic leaders in the entire world. And now that's not the case at all. But I think it's important to understand that the data mining false prophet Shawn Bolz got his start working directly with Mike Bickle. And now Bethel is in a somewhat awkward position, having to sort of defend Shawn Bolz, but at the same time not defend Shawn Bolz. The most alarming part about their statement to the general public, or actually to their alumni, Bethel also alleged Bolz was accused by one of the employees of behaviors that seemed to fit the description of sexual harassment and a hostile work environment, according to the statement. Well, Bob Jones was kind of his grandpa, as he says.
I love Bob Jones with all my heart. He's like my grandpa. I think when I went to Kansas City, I was released in just kind of a weird ministry, meaning like there wasn't like an official staff position for people like me.
Yeah, because it wasn't as amazing that your whole time there, that it was about, like you said, it was about you learning obedience.
Totally.
And being fathered by Mike Bickle in a way that wasn't actually
very unique. Yeah. And I love Kansas City. They just did such a good job in my life in so many ways. And
now I want you to see this clip of Shawn Bolz, which inspired me to make this video you're watching now.
I had a word when I was 15 years old from a friend of mine, and she said one day in a worship time, she looks at me, she says, "You're going to be Bob Jones, and when you do, your whole life will change." Now, I'd heard of him because in the church movement we were involved with, he had been someone involved, and he had prophesied and done some things.
Here's what it says on Shawn's old bio on his old website. Shawn was involved in different types of leadership with Metro Christian Fellowship with Mike Bickle for 8 years, and then made the transition to the International House of Prayer in Kansas City for 4 years. While there, he taught in the Bible school, ministered to thousands of leaders in the body of Christ from every Christian denomination, and mentored many people. He was also known as one of the prophetic voices in Kansas City, where he was involved with Shiloh and prophetic leadership. So basically, when this guy was getting started, he spent his first 12 years working closely with Mike Bickle. So it makes sense that he would be closely associated with Bob Jones as well.
But this man was involved with Morning Star Ministries with Rick Joyner. He prophesied the buildings they have and what they're doing. IHOP, with International House of Prayer, Mike Bickle, prophesying the House of Prayer movement. Bethel School of Ministry, prophesied that with Pastor Bill Johnson and Chris Valentin. Luingo with the call and the send, he helped prophesy those into being.
Folks, they have a culture of prayer. We have a prayer meeting. What? It's all changing. When Mike Bickle came on the scene, wham, ideologies begin to shift. Day and night prayer is now in the language of the church worldwide.
So this man has had a prophetic history of movements and launching leaders around the body of Christ. When he gives people words, people took notice because of the radical fruit that he had in his life, and because of the radical fruit that he had in his life.
We go to meetings with Bob Jones, right? And he's passed away now, and he would say some like outlandish things.
Right.
But some of the stuff that he said was like...
It was legit?
Legitimate. Mike Bickle, some of the greatest encounters he's ever had. The foundation of IHOP was off words of Bob Jones. I don't want our spirit-filled movement to get too safe.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want our spirit-filled movement to get too safe.
I don't want our spirit-filled movement to get too safe.
Yeah.
Right?
Mike Bickle, the manipulative predator, is a product of this very environment. He's a product of this philosophy. All of these men who are basically idolatrous of Bob Jones would say, yeah, he's pretty weird. He was kind of crazy. He did some things he probably shouldn't have, but boy, was he used by God. He had a special gifting from God, so you really shouldn't speak against him. I want to play you a little bit more of that roundtable discussion from April of a couple of years ago with Sam Storms and Justin Peters interacting, and then you'll see my interaction with that video.
Now, Bob Jones was a very unusual individual, quirky beyond words.
Immoral, sexually immoral.
Now, let's be clear about that.
Okay.
See, that's really slanderous. There was one incident in which Bob Jones manipulated two ladies.
It's not slanderous to say that somebody is sexually immoral when they tell women to strip naked in their office so that God can give them a specific prophetic word. Now, he didn't have sex with them, if that's what you mean. So does that make it not quite as bad? Is it sort of okay-ish? Seems like he's implying that. I know he isn't, but the language here is, well, it's the language that allows people like Mike Bickle to continually have a platform for decades. That's what it is.
On the basis of what he contended was a prophetic revelation, he never had sexual relations with them.
So he admits that Bob Jones told these women because he believed God was telling him, ladies, take off your clothes. This is the man who also said a bunch of other things that started an entire movement. So why do we reject the ones about the women being naked, but we accept the ones about the great prayer movement? Which ones do we accept and which ones do we not accept? I think we don't accept any of them. That's my opinion. I think that we just reject people like this in their entirety, and we see if we can keep them away from having any kind of a teaching or any kind of an influence in the church. So if we love the people in our churches, we should be protecting them from people like Bob Jones. We shouldn't be protecting Bob Jones from the discernment ministers.
Never.
But didn't they?
Was then removed from ministry for several years, submitted to counseling and discipline under the leadership of John Wimber in the Vineyard, and only after several years was he ever restored to ministry. And just so we can be clear about this, Mike Bickle told him, "You will never stand on my platform again. I'll never give you a microphone."
Bob Jones had women come into his office and told them to strip naked so that he could prophesy properly over them, because that's what God told him to do. And Sam downplays it as if that only happened once and it's not that bad. And after all, Mike Bickle told him he would never have the platform ever again because of that. Well, they're still talking about Bob Jones as a great prophet, as somebody that we all need to pay close attention to.
Because it's the prophetic that strengthens our faith.
The Lord is calling for a house of prayer and a house of intercession to come into being. That'll be open 24 hours a day, to where the saints of God, whenever they get to calling, can go there and begin to pray. The praise will be there. You can go there and be ministered to. You can go there and join in the intercession. It'll be open night and day. It'll be the place that the saints of God will just literally go there and pour themselves out to the Lord like a love offering. And intercession and praise will be there 24 hours a day.
Really, it began in 82, even before that. And I was in a church and I told the pastor, there's a group of young people that's coming that God is going to use in a big way. And their main calling will be praise and intercession. A friend of mine in Kansas City said, Bob, there's some young people you need to meet. They come from St. Louis. And he said, I think you're supposed to meet them. And I said, yeah, I am.
You know, I remember 36 years ago when Bob Jones first walked in my office with that strange winter coat, those overalls, and he told me all of these things. And I remember thinking, this man is so off. I mean, I had no way of understanding what he said.
And on the first day of spring, when the snow is melting, then I'll tell you the secret of your heart, and you believe me who I am.
So Bob Jones was an incredible hearer. He heard the Lord, and then he just stepped to the plate, and he didn't have to know who they were. He was not really a respecter of persons, from the great to the poor. He would just prophesy over them and speak truth to them. I was just in awe of his ability to continue to do that.
So which one is it? He's a guy who told women to strip naked in his office, but he's also a really good guy that we should love and respect? I have a wife. I have daughters. If they were told to strip naked in front of a man in his office, I wouldn't be saying nice things about him ever again. And I certainly wouldn't be referring to him as somebody that God used as a mighty tool to start a movement.
So Mike was very clear about his stance with regard to that, at the same time recognizing that Bob had a remarkable gift.
So Bob had a remarkable gift. This is the Todd Bentley excuse-making program. Yeah, Todd Bentley was sleeping with the intern. He was showing up drunk. He left his wife and children, but boy, he sure had a gift. I think this is the number one reason why trying to get new prophetic utterances from people who sort of maybe are prophets is inherently dangerous. It's inherently dangerous. There's no way to know for sure that something terrible won't happen. The way you do know for sure that something terrible won't happen is to not consider anybody a current modern-day prophet.
I mean, the Corinthians were as goofy and carnal as they can be, and yet they came behind no one in spiritual gifts.
I just got to say, this is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. The reason we have so much information or so much correction from the Apostle Paul to the Corinthians is because of how flawed they were and how immoral they were. They were actually guilty of misusing their spiritual gifts. That's why we have all of the information about the proper usage of the spiritual gifts. I've got a couple of quotes here from Mike Bickle's book, Growing in the Prophetic, where he teaches the same thing, that spiritual gifts are given as a free gift, just like salvation is a free gift to people who don't deserve it, so spiritual gifts are given to people who don't deserve it. The problem for us is that it is very hard to know what is really in someone's heart or how God perceives them. We need to be careful about judging spiritual gifts as invalid because of people's weakness and immaturity. God may be more concerned about what he has set out to accomplish in the life of the prophetic vessel than about passing full judgment on that person. Here's another quote from the next page. The fact that power and revelation flow through prophetic ministers is not necessarily a sign that God is pleased with the other areas of their lives. Sometimes the prophetic gifts will continue to operate even when there is an inner crumbling taking place in their private lives. This terrible idea is not found in the Bible, certainly not in the teachings of Jesus or any of the apostles. It's not a teaching of the Christian church, yet it was being taught and followed for decades. Now here's a related false teaching from the terrible false teacher Bill Johnson, and you'll notice that you combine these two ideas together and you've got a train wreck.
This may sound strange to you, but in our school of ministry, our students are actually required to get it wrong. If they don't fail at least 3 times in the first year, we won't let them in the second year. Why? If you're not willing to take risk to the point where you get it wrong, you probably won't get it right in the way you need to. But secondly, we want you to get it wrong in a loving environment so you know how to clean up your mess.
If you simply take Bill Johnson's teaching here, it makes sense that Bob Jones doing what he did isn't that bad, according to the leaders in this movement. Bob Jones thought he was hearing from God. He was taking risks. He was telling Mike Bickle to do the same thing with a whole bunch of young women. Now listen to this unbelievably bad clip of Shawn Bolz talking about an experience he had with some of the Kansas City prophets during his time with Mike Bickle.
So I just want to read this. Growing in the gift of giving words of knowledge is no more challenging than any other revelatory gifts. It's just more black and white. You can't say, I feel like your birthday is in May without it being absolutely right or absolutely wrong. So some of us go, it just feels so hard. It's hard because you're accountable immediately to the information. And this is one of the hardest things where we don't want to be accountable to information because we don't like to be wrong. So if you like to be right, you're not going to grow in the word of knowledge. I'm just being really honest. And I'm publicly displaying in front of thousands of people all the time. Sometimes I'm wrong.
So Shawn is going to continue to make the point that it's not important that you're accurate or that you're right. It's only important that you're vulnerable and you're honest and you admit from the get-go you're probably going to get some things wrong.
And I'm being okay with it because I was around prophets who are like, my words have never dropped to the ground. I'm infallible. I've actually had prophets tell me this. People that you respect, that you'd probably come to their conferences, and I'm like, ooh, that feels bad. That's like an old culture thing that came in the church somehow, because if you were wrong, you got disqualified, your conferences shrunk or something. I don't know. But there's a pressure for you to have to tell me your words didn't fall to the ground. And I just know human nature. When I start tracking for Mike Bickle, I start tracking several prophets that we were stewarding in our Kansas City prophetic movement. And I was finding areas that they were wrong in. And I'd go to them and I would say, hey, this lady, like one of them, one of the main prophets of that movement, I went to him and I said, this woman, she's actually died of cancer. You called her out by the date, her birthday, told her name and told her family she's going to live and not die. And then she died 27 days later. Do you mind just calling her and comforting her heart, just saying, hey, I'm so sorry, the prophetic, I'm not her, I'm sorry, her husband. That was really inappropriate. Her husband, and just saying, hey, I'm really sorry that my word didn't work out. I don't know why. And I'm just praying for your family. It's all you got to do. And he goes, no, they probably sinned.
So Shawn is telling the story of one of the main Kansas City prophets who said somebody wasn't going to die and they died. He goes to them and says, gosh, you should probably call up the family and apologize. And the prophet says, no, it's their own fault because they sinned. So in this scenario that he's setting up here, you have two kinds of prophets, the ones who want to be right, who won't be right, but they will still pretend to be right, and the prophets like him, who also won't be right, but at least they'll be honest about it. There are no actual prophets who are right all the time, unlike the prophets in the Bible. But according to Shawn Bolz and most of the other leaders in this movement, those are Old Testament prophets, and we're in the New Testament where you can make mistakes all you want.
There are pastors who are amazing, and I was like, no! And I literally went, I don't know how to rebuke you. I need to slap you with the Bible or something. I don't know what to do. And I said, no, this is called taking responsibility. You have to do it. No. And it came from a generation who wasn't allowed to be vulnerable with their weakness, that we're just human. And we had to be right. In the Old Testament theology, that you always have to be right or you're stoned or killed for the most part. And in the New Testament, it wasn't about the information being right. It was about the quality of love you gave. The only debt that remains, according to Romans, is the debt of love, not accuracy. Praise Jesus.
No surprise here that that's a complete misuse of that verse. But what is he really doing here? He's grooming people. He's telling them that real prophets are just honest. They make mistakes, sure, but they're honest, they're vulnerable. They're not like those old-fashioned ones. I would say that these kinds of prophets are basically useless at best. What good is a word from God if you never know for sure that it's really a word from God? This is really pretty dangerous. When you think about the ramifications of where this can go, it's really bad. Here's Mike Bickle fangirl Jennifer LeClaire teaching the exact same bad, unbiblical idea.
You know, a false prophet is one who has the motive to deceive. Now, true prophets can and do miss it. There are many people I've seen in the season who do not believe that a true prophet can ever miss it.
Yeah.
What they're doing is, Larry, they're looking at the Old Testament paradigm, where they were just real oracles of God. It was like God's mouth to their mouth, pop. You know, there was no room for error. You were either true or false. Mike Bickle taught me this. He said, you know, in the New Testament, we are speaking forth the counsel of God, but we are infallible. So it's our soul sometimes gets mixed in. Our biases sometimes gets mixed in. So it's either true or it's false, but that doesn't make the one who prophesied wrongly a false prophet.
But at a really fundamental level, Shawn Bolz or Mike Bickle or Bob Jones are not really the problem. The movement itself is the problem. The teachings of this movement are not Christian teachings. They're the teachings of a cult-like organization. All cults have revered leaders who are constantly being quoted and referred to, and the audience or the followers are always being told, don't you question this leader. Don't you dare question this leader. They've been given to us by God. For instance, listen to Francis Chan in the year 2021 scolding people for daring to consider the possibility that Mike Bickle may not be the great leader that he says he is.
I just want to speak to, this isn't IHOP, this is for other people who might be watching this, because I know some of you have ditched Mike, and some of you ditched him because of something you think you might have heard someone say that may or may not be true. And so you're going to ditch all of that. 50 years of prayer, teaching, you know, a lifestyle. And I thank God for a simple lifestyle. He could have made so much money and be living this lavish life, but he lived this way for all of those years. And you're going to ditch all of that and all the ridiculous stories because you heard something from a friend. I would say you are so foolish. And also, you better be careful, because the Spirit of God dwells inside of him, and you so easily depart from a son of God. I just can't do that.
Of whether I judge a fine Christian man like Mike Bickle to be a false teacher, I'm going to turn around and tell the person asking that question, you're out of line, you don't even know the man, you don't know his life, his walk, his fruit, etc.
Mike Bickle says it best. He says, God's anger is always aimed at whatever interferes with love. There must be a hatred for sin if there's a love for God. There must be. Not hatred of the sinner, hatred of sin. There must be that resolve to be and to do everything that would bring him glory. Those who see him, those who behold him, function different than everybody else.
Wow. Bob Jones gave a word from Acts 2. Oh.
This last week was Bob Jones' homegoing anniversary. He died on Valentine's Day. If you don't know who he was a wonderful friend of ours, an amazing prophet of the Lord.
I love Bill Johnson because he's a man with an authentic walk with God when nobody's looking, and he's a man of courage.
The greatest inspirations of my husband's life is Mike Bickle. Then the whole foot
Begin to move. Then the other one.
So our friend Mike Bickle is helping us. Steve Hill, Pastor Steve Hill is partnering with us. Many other great leaders are doing as well.
Many years ago, I actually worked is in Kansas City with Mike Bickle. And one of the things that I really, really loved, Mike taught us constantly to pray for three things. Pray for the fullness of power, the gifts. Pray for the fullness of character, the fullness of the fruit of the Spirit. And pray for the wisdom ways of God for every facet of church and kingdom life. Now there you go. Now there you go.
When people listen to these stories, I know your response, folks, and it comes down basically either they are genuinely true or Mike Bickle is a pathological liar. And he's not a pathological liar. I know this man deeply.
I was asked a question several years ago by some of our students and what I thought about Mike Bickle and Lou Engle. And I said, man, those are the two most important people alive in my book.
Forerunners would come forth. 10,000 prophesied and promised to Mike Bickle. It was promised to me as well. I want you to lift your hands, lift your voice at the hour of incense, and everywhere begin to call on God. Loose the prophetic messengers into the earth. Go ahead. All across this place, lift your voices.
To say, Lord, more.
I had to make a decision long ago when I came here. Do I think Mike Bickle is a demonized liar?
A greater manifestation of your glory. Fire!
So you never did this kind of thing before?
No.
Had you ever seen it before?
No.
You've never seen this kind of manifestation of the Holy Spirit that you're now experiencing?
Yeah.
No. You never had?
No.
Either Satan has orchestrated this entire scenario and all these people have conspired behind the scenes to deceive massive numbers of folk for their own aggrandizement and their own, Mike has really prospered financially from this, but yeah, right.
Oh, yeah. And then...
Because you haven't stopped shaking since you've been on the platform.
Before the platform, she was sitting over there shaking for the last 2 hours. Yeah.
The whole thing, the fasted lifestyle, live simple. Well, we're finding that he's funding all of this double life that he's living, and that's lots of money's going to this double life of sin,
I was doing so much ministry in Kansas City, and I never had asked formal permission, and I was part of a church where you're supposed to do that. And I was like, I'm going to get in huge trouble because I've never talked to Mike Bickle about this. And one day I get called into the office, and I'm like, oh no, this is it? And him and his wife call me and they're like, hey, you've been impacting our church. It's so beautiful. Can you just tell us who you are so we can endorse you? And I'm like, am I in trouble? No, you're not in trouble. This is awesome.
So as you can see, I think he was about 19 years old from what I understand in the various quotes I've heard. He was at the church in Kansas City, pastored by Mike Bickle. And in that version of the story, Mike Bickle comes to him and says, wow, you're doing a great job. We just want to know who you are so we can endorse you. But now listen to this version of the story.
So while I was waiting, I was in Kansas City, and I had the least gifting of all the Kansas City prophetic people. I'm not kidding. I'm not just self-deprecating. I really had the least gifting.
I soon thought something was off. And then he started to tell me about the alcohol that was in the fridge and that he had been drinking.
And I get caught up into a rapturous moment. Caught up! I'm not doing astral projection like some do today. And they will themselves into things. No, I was worshiping God. And I got caught up. And of all things, I go to heaven and God talks to me about Mike Bickle. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, what? And God talks to me about Mike Bickle. And he says, your friend, my servant, Mike Bickle, is laboring before me for a worldwide embrace of the Holy Spirit. And then, bam, there I'm back down in the meeting.
Mike Bickle said, I heard Mike Bickle say this week, and I believe it is a word from the Lord. You open your heart to Jesus, and he'll open the door to his glory.
Mike Bickle said something at one point.
That's what Mike Bickle said the other night. Mike Bickle says it this way.
I learned this from Mike Bickle. I love Francis Chan!
That's what Mike Bickle says. Shock me now, don't shock me at the throne.
I got this from Mike Bickle, and I'm going to expound on it, okay? Credit where credit is due.
I can't think of a more biblically orthodox, humble, Christ-exalting individual.
You know, I'm watching what's happening with IHOP, and by the way, I want to say publicly, I love Mike Bickle. I don't know what the outcome will be, but it won't change the fact that I love him. That's right. Yeah. He's my brother. It won't change the fact that he's my brother.
Every penny of his honoraria and of his royalties goes to missions.
That he's used his honorarium money to buy us each a hotel room, which, you know, I'm thinking, I don't want my own hotel room. But that's what happened. And so I went to my hotel room. And again, you know, Paris, Europe, it's really small. And as soon as I walk in, the landline, the phone rings, and it's Mike. And he says, hey, let's meet at the restaurant across the street. And again, if I was thinking clearly, I would have not said yes, but I wasn't at this time. And so I met him at the restaurant. And I remember he got us a couple rounds of cocktails.
Every penny of his honoraria and of his royalties goes to missions, to support the missions base.
He lives in a duplex. He's lived in a duplex all his life.
So I would say for at least 17 years, I had been gently but confronting Mike on every different thing, whether it was leadership or theology or another woman, or I had a dream, or I saw you do this to a woman in front of me and that's really wrong. So I had confronted him, again, thinking I was a daughter that actually had a voice, thinking that he would listen. And then it took me a while to realize, no, he's not listening. And then it took me a while to go, you know, you're the evil man behind the curtain. Even the whole thing, you send your flying monkeys to do your bidding. And I told him that too, years and years ago, gently again with tears. But I said, Mike, I can't follow Jesus and stay at IHOP. I said, that should alarm you. I go, I can't do what God's asked me to do as a believer and stay here.
This is the first time I've ever been to an IHOP event. Which is, it's kind of crazy to me because I didn't know that much. And, you know, so I kind of went on the internet and started looking things up, and I go, man, there's a lot of great things going on here. And today was the first time I ever met Mike Bickle. And I love that guy.
So in 2013, Francis Chan looks up International House of Prayer on the interwebs and finds out that it's really doing some good stuff. Then he meets Mike Bickle, and within that very first day, he says, I love this guy. Francis Chan shows no discernment whatsoever for the next 10 years until it's discovered that, wow, Mike Bickle really is a creep.
I do. I mean, you know, and Mike knows we've talked about this, you know, there's people that told me not to hang out with him. Like, you know, words like creepy come up. Words like creepy come up. Words like creepy come up.
Are you going to attack Mike Bickle? Are you going to attack some of these expressions in the body of Christ that may look a little... I'm just saying, dude, put that down. I've met these people and I see their hearts and I hang out with people from these different denominations. I'm like, man, they love Jesus. It looks different from me, but I can see the Spirit in them. So we better be careful.
And Mike, you know, he had a smile on his face, like he's not going to be mean, but with a smile, he begins to threaten Murray, and saying, you know, if you make something of this, then this is going to happen to you. And I'm going to tell the world this, and the world will believe me about you or about me. And just threatens financially, threatens every different way of what's going to happen to us if we do this.
Well, Bill Johnson, welcome. Thank you. Thank you. I have such affection and respect for him. We have such a great time. We spent hours today talking and laughing and inspiring. And I have read his books, watched his videos, stole his material shamelessly, been instructed by the Lord through him.
So I'm talking to Todd Friel, right? And he says to me, Mike Bickle, false teacher, right? Do
you all believe Mike Bickle's a false teacher?
I want him to know about your new book, God is Good. Bill has this just relentless resolve to teach about the goodness of God's heart. The Lord is good. And that is what this book is about. Just give a minute on that.
And I really do feel that way. I'm so impacted by the devotion of these people to cry out to God, to seek God, to be worshipers 24/7. The whole IHOP ministry, it's just such an honor. There's not many people. I would leave my family to come here to hang out for a few days. Not many folks I'd do that for, but Mike is one of them. And he didn't have to beg me at all. I was deeply honored.
And Mike Bickle comes up to him and says, this is about the billion soul harvest.
Somebody posted on my social page a couple days ago, and they're like, they said, oh, you haven't said anything about, the IHOP situation, so you obviously are part of the problem. I'm like, I wrote back, replied.
You're an idiot.
I thank you for Morning Star, Lord. I thank you for Mike Bickle's church, for IHOP, God. I thank you, Lord, for these mighty men and women of God.
Mike Bickle was here last October, which was so fun. If you ever have Mike, I thought Chris Valentin was the most intense person I had ever met. Mike Bickle trumped Chris. It was like, oh my gosh, Mike. And then you put Chris and Mike in the same room, and they banter each other. It is comical. And it's like, dang, these guys are passionate. They can run the universe together.
And I really love Bill Johnson, and even Chris Valentin. I really like him too.
I know you're human, believe it or not. You really are.
Mike Bickle makes a statement that is one of my favorites. He says,
There's lovers and there's workers, and lovers will always get more work done than the workers.
That's brilliant.
Mike Bickle said it this way.
And I'm just so happy that after I'm finished tonight, I just get to come and attend tomorrow and enjoy Mike Bickle.
Mike Bickle. Do you remember what Mike Bickle said?
And enjoy Mike Bickle. Mike, can I tell you the first time I met Mike? Would you like to hear about it? Okay, this is how he introduced himself to me. So he comes and preaches at our church, and that Lisa and I attend in Colorado, and he says, I want to go to lunch with you, because we both published with the same publishing company. I want to get to know you. I said, great. Bring your boys. Now my boys, 4 boys, from 12 down to 4. Got it? And he goes to the restaurant. He said, guys, I want to buy all of you 2 desserts. Okay? And then he looks at Lisa and I and says, I want you to have a fun afternoon.
We also got the privilege of being with Morning Star and the whole prophetic movement.
Now, the history of propping up sexual predators, frauds, crooks, false teachers, heretics at Morning Star Ministries is off the charts. I'm going to leave some links below, but even as I'm making this video right now, new videos are coming out from people who used to work at Morning Star, people who worked closely with Rick Joyner. Rick Joyner is a very bad man, and he is at the very heart of this movement, just like Mike Bickle, Bill Johnson, Lou Engle, and all the other people I'm featuring in this video. And just to be totally clear, this is not an issue of cessationist versus continuationist. There are plenty of charismatics who are incredibly angry and upset with these false teachers in their own movement.
With Bob Jones became a spiritual father to me. He was crazy. I told some Bob Jones stories during the conference, and he was crazy. I told some Bob Jones stories during the conference, and we got to be really good friends. Larry Randolph, Paul Cain, Bobby Connors, and obviously Rick Joyner.
Here's a very old discernment video about some of the stuff that goes on at Rick Joyner's Morning Star Ministries.
All right. Tori's got something she's going to release, and when this releases, it's going to be like a starting gun for the ministry time. So those of you who like ministry, go ahead and stand up. Get in the middle section. Youth, children, those who have been touched by the fire, prepare to minister. Yeah, he's here. He's here. He's here. 2 days ago, I saw Jesus opening himself up and walking in our midst. Today, the phrase that keeps going in my mind and in my heart is that my deep calls out to his deep. My deep calls out to his deep. My deep calls out to your deep, Jesus. My deep calls out to your deep. My deep goes out to his deep. My deep goes out to his deep.
know, Mike Bickle, a number of years ago, said this will be the greatest generation to ever live because in the midst of all the options, they choose him.
And I was sitting at a table with a number of folks that you would know, with Mike Bickle and Rick Joyner, a bunch of others.
A great people that Lou Engle.
Chris Valentin doesn't even know the guy's name.
Lou Engle. That guy is amazing. Mike Bickle. These are men that I so respect.
Mike Bickle said, I heard Mike Bickle say this week, and I believe it is a word from the Lord. You open your heart to Jesus, and he'll open the door to his glory.
Mike Bickle said something at one point.
That's what Mike Bickle said the other night. Mike Bickle says it this way.
I learned this from Mike Bickle. I love Francis Chan.
That's what Mike Bickle says. Shock me now, don't shock me at the throne.
I got this from Mike Bickle, and I'm going to expound on it, okay? Credit where credit is due.
And so with me today, I have Mike Bickle, who is the founder of International House of Prayer, who I'll introduce more in a few moments. We have Wesley and Stacy Campbell.
I did Mike Bickle, mutual friend, on Harp and Bowl.
Yes.
I used Cindy Jacobs as a model on prophetic intercession.
I tell them their story about Mike Bickle.
How many years ago is that? 40. Right in the middle of when Mike Bickle called for the Joel's Army 21-day fast.
And Mike Bickle and John Paul Jackson and I and a bunch of others worked together at Jack Hayford. Mike Bickle, you changed my life.
I've heard it for years from Mike Bickle and Lou Engle. And
Look at what's happened with Mike Bickle's call to prayer. Over 20 years ago, he started 24/7 Harp and Bowl prayer.
Paul Cain sent a word, and James Ryle had a word, and Mike Bickle had a word.
But I was in the room with Mike Bickle and James Gall and Jill Austin and a handful of other leaders.
Yeah. The last days, as some have said, I think it's my buddy Mike Bickle, he'll say, they're going to be gory and glory. Yes. Glory and glory. It's true.
I interviewed people that said, yes, we were seeking God. Mike Bickle said, we were praying that our country, that he would raise up somebody, and we didn't have anybody in mind.
My first time I took systematic theology, I was like, this is bullcrap. Like, I don't agree with 90% of this, and I threw it out. You're going to be Bob Jones, and when you do, your whole life will change.
The day after Orlando, I had to know. I sent an email to Mike Bickle from the International House of Prayer in Kansas City, and I know Mike well enough to know that he had just ended one thing. He doesn't really love big gatherings. He was supposed to speak in Orlando, and like a week before Orlando, he emails, he goes, Andy, I'm going to be way better off to you if I can just pray in the prayer room. I'm like, you've been in the prayer room for 22 years.
Well, now we know with horrific detail what was actually going on in the so-called prayer room. The room that had a lock on the inside so that nobody could come in and disturb Mike Bickle and the young interns he was teaching, quote unquote.
We have good news for right now because we've had, for instance, the International House of Prayer movement with Mike Bickle.
Well, I have hours of footage and many more documents to go into much greater detail, but this video is already long enough. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you check out the links below. I'm going to reference a lot of other videos that I know will be helpful. I encourage you to really do your best to educate yourself, to learn about what's really happened here, to go into the past and to understand where things went wrong so that these things don't continue happening in the future. Most importantly, I hope that you can maintain your faith. In fact, I hope you can grow your faith and you can discover that maybe there was a lot of things you thought were Christianity that weren't Christianity at all. And maybe you'll discover, like I have, that Christianity is actually much, much better than the false teachings of people like Mike Bickle and Shawn Bolz and Paul Cain and Bob Jones and Bill Johnson and many of these other people. My intention here is not to tear people down, but to actually build up true Christians who want to grow in their faith. Thank you so much for watching, and may God bless you.
Basta!
But I saw it connected to And One Dan. This is a username or something, And One Dan. I think it's her email.
That they would do signs,
They would do wonders.
Creepy.
Hey.